Hello, watch enthusiasts. Now, in the world of wristwatches, it's become very apparent in recent years that interesting design and interesting aesthetics are really paramount to the popularity of a watch. And this has been seen with a number of brands, with everything from Nomos, for instance, which offer very crisp and interesting design, through to brands such as Autodromo, which offer sporting and racing designs, which, though their movements on the face of things, for example, spending £600 on a Mecha Quartz Seiko movement, to me seems rather excessive. And yet, with their design and care and attention to detail, they're able to produce a watch which actually really is worth the money. And for a while, actually, there hasn't been an equivalent in the budget sort of realm. And I am aware that a great deal of my viewers can't, and I think rightly, may not want to spend thousands of pounds on a wristwatch. And so, as a result, I do enjoy bringing these budget offerings, or at least these affordable offerings, to my channel. And I've been approached by a brand by the name of Roue, who I feel follow these lines very, very well in producing a watch which is far from being a sort of a fashion watch, because it does represent true horological heritage and real care taken to choosing the movement, but does offer it for a very reasonable price of below the £200 mark. And as suggested by the name, these watches are in fact racing inspired, as the name means wheel in French, Roue. And I would like to stress at this stage, before I begin the review, that I really haven't been paid in any way, shape or form to produce this review. I simply chose the brand because I thought they were very interesting, and their backstory would suggest a very similar approach. And they come in this interesting packaging, which is not flashy at all, but I think represents the brand in a very, very good light, just as, for example, Apple packaging, which is incidentally one of the inspirations, is a similar sort of story, where you have a very simple packaging, but that's very high quality and offers a great deal in terms of presenting the item very well. And this is magnetically closed and simply folds open like this to present the booklet of the brand, which I shall just remove. And there you can see the first of the two. And the design of these watches is very typical of the 60s and 70s, and has taken inspiration from a number of industrial designers, notably Dieter Rams from Braun, Hartmut Esslinger from Apple, amongst other places, and the very well-known industrial designer who is Richard Sapper. And as a result, these watches do come out in that particular style. And I have a few here, in this case two, which I think are represented extremely well, with a more simple three-hand model, again using a quartz movement, but for a particular reason, which I'll explain later in the video, which is very clear with this quartz movement, as well as a chronograph version, which again I feel does truly follow the brand's ideals of having a very design-orientated and very well built and conceived watch for an excellent price. Now I'll just unpack these watches and show you their features. Now the watches from the brand all feature a very similar design language, and this is designed to be a sort of a staple for the brand, which I think is a wise choice, because a great deal of brands do try to produce a great many different watches at the same time, which in general tends to confuse the buyer and ends up leaving the brand with less following than it would have otherwise. And the reason why I find these watches so impressive is the fact that they're very, very well considered. And the way I see this is the fact that this is a 41.5mm watch, which is about right for most wrists, with a very short lug-to-lug length, which, as you can see on my wrist, sits very comfortably on the surface, though I'll show you a proper wrist shot later on in the video. And these watches are only actually 10.9mm thick and significantly slimmer for the three-hand models. And these are watches which have been designed with the user in mind. And this is demonstrated by the fact that they've used a Miyota 6S10, which is a movement which is seen in a lot of watches around this price point and significantly higher. But it's a similar movement to the ones used in some of the Dan Henry chronographs. But the fact is, if they had used a movement in the case of, for example, a Seagull ST12, which is the mechanical equivalent, the watch would have been at least 14 or 15mm thick, which, with a tonneau-style case like this, which is carried across the range and is really the staple of the brand, this wouldn't be wearable. It would sit very, very high on the wrist and would protrude a great deal. But where they have invested in terms of giving the watch the correct features, considering the fact that this is designed to be a 70s-inspired watch, is in the care taken to make the watch perfect as far as an image of the past with today's technology is. And this is shown by the fact that they haven't, for instance, for the price of this watch, which comes in at around £200, gone with a mineral crystal, but rather they've used a sapphire. And similarly, they've matched the sapphire crystal gasket with the hands and the dial accents, which is a detail which they didn't have to do, but I feel really does bring out this dial, which is a really real thing of beauty on the front of this watch. And similarly, the dial is extremely cleverly laid out, so one can clearly see that a great deal of care has been taken to give it a lot of levels. So one has the lower level being the subdials, which are also very, very nicely painted, as well as that slightly raised section around the edge of the dial, which gives this dial a great deal of depth to it, and I think makes the watch much more interesting than if it had a simple flat dial. And this is further accentuated by that asymmetrical style of subdial placement, which is why this movement was also selected, because it does offer the right features in terms of the look. And also one does have the date presented at 3 o'clock, which I think is something, a useful commodity, which will be useful for many people. Also, when it comes to functionality, I rather do like the way this watch has been considered in terms of its functionality. So, for instance, if one starts the chronograph going, they have chosen a movement with a flowing second hand, which again is in keeping with the era, and with a split-second timer, which is a useful feature considering this is a racing watch and is inspired by racing watches of the 1970s from, for example, Omega and Hoya. And as one can see, that at 12 o'clock one has this split seconds, and then as well at 9 o'clock one has the running minutes. And this makes for a very uncluttered dial, which nonetheless provides all the legibility you would expect, with my only real complaint being the fact that I would have chosen a brighter colour for that second hand, which in any light other than bright light is very legible, but often when one has a very bright light on it, it can be difficult to see the hand, which is something I would recommend being adjusted with this timepiece. However, the one beauty of this movement is really in its resistance to shocks, which is crucial really for a sports watch like this. And that's the fact that if one does knock the watch, and this is something that's proprietary to these movements and isn't the case with, for example, the Seiko VK line of movements, seen in, for example, Autodromos, or indeed some of the other chronographs for a little bit more than this, and the chronograph movement seen inside the watch, which I showed you quite recently from Undone, is that if you were to knock this watch, you can very quickly, by pulling the crown out and adjusting with the pushers, you can realign the hands, which is crucial really for a watch like this, and is in fact one of the reasons why a great deal of mechanical watches end up being serviced, because they've been knocked and the hands have been kicked out of alignment. So that's a nice detail to have on this movement, and I think does take advantage of the fact that it is quartz, though it is a fully serviceable movement and can be taken into a repair centre if something goes wrong to be repaired, which is something that I like to see on quartz movements, which is left out on a lot of the more low-end movements. In terms of timekeeping, this should keep well within chronometer certifications, so you will be getting around less than 1 second a day, which is, again, exactly what you'd expect from a movement of this quality. And in fact, this is the movement which is the base movement for all the Bulliver high-precision movements, which again adds to the kudos, I suppose, of such a movement. Now, leaving aside the movement now and talking more about the case, as I've said, the dial is beautifully done, and that sapphire crystal on the top of it does allow you a great deal of legibility. And as you can see from the colouring of it, it does have an anti-reflective coating on the inside and is very legible, really to any angle, because it is a flat crystal and is a high-quality one too. And of course, one does have a tachometer on the dial as well, which is nicely placed and isn't obtrusive in terms of taking up too much space. Additionally, the case design is very, very attractive, with this tonneau style being very comfortable on the wrist, and actually much slimmer than one would expect. It has suitable wrist presence, but slips under a cuff very easily at 10.9mm thick, and with a very shallow raise here, which allows a cuff to slip right over the top of it. And in terms of the care taken with the rest of the watch, it is shown in the straps as well, where I think they've taken a great deal of care, and these straps are very, very nice quality, from this period correct 70s or 60s style of leather strap, rally strap, with these holes cut into it, which are nicely finished on the inside and along the sides. And you will also notice that the strap itself is, if I can get it to focus, padded and tapered, which means it does taper down the strap to produce a very thin and very, very supple feel, which requires almost no breaking in. And of course it is proper leather. And each watch comes with 2 straps in the box. So this one, for example, came with this very attractive leather strap, which is incidentally very, very comfortable and does feature the quick release spring bars, which again are very useful to have, as well as this buckle, which I must say I'm rather fond of, because it does make putting the strap on remarkably easy without damaging the strap, which is often something you find where pin buckle style of releases on the strap do tend to, over time, damage the holes in the strap, where this, I suppose due to its very soft bead blasting, doesn't have that effect, which I think is quite crucial with a very soft leather strap like this, which is nicely textured. And this model does also come with a silicon strap as well, which is, again, I think perfect considering the fact that this is designed to be a sports watch, and one is likely to be using it in a situation where you wouldn't want to be wearing a leather strap. So having a silicon strap as well, which is nicely signed, as you can see, and again is of high quality, is nice to have. And considering the price of approximately £200 for this watch, or $265, you really are getting a lot of watch. And where a lot of brands that cost twice as much as this watch still don't have sapphire crystals, it's brilliant to see them do that on this watch, as well as the anti-reflective coating, which does show their care when manufacturing it. And the detailing also is shown on the crown and pushers, for instance, which are just the right angle to allow you to press in very easily. And I'm pleased they didn't go for a larger pusher design, as is often the case with these tonneau style of cases, but rather kept that style where it goes in perpendicular to the dial, which is again helpful for tactility and also in terms of looking its era. And the crown is also very nicely designed to be slim, but due to that bevel in it, it's very easy to pull out, and then from which you can adjust the date nicely, and as well as that, adjust the time, which does add practicality to the watch. And I feel this does offer all the conveniences that you would want from a watch, whilst keeping the package slim and practical at that very thin thickness, which wouldn't be the case if they'd gone for example, a seagull movement, which, though brilliant, would increase the thickness and therefore make this watch far less wearable. And in fact, incidentally, is one of the complaints with, for example, vintage Speedmaster Mark IIIs or even Mark IIs, where they have a similar style of case, but due to their thickness, a lot of people find them cumbersome on the wrist, which luckily isn't the case with this watch. And there is also a second watch sent to me which showcases the rest of their designs as well, and this is a three-hander, which again has been designed very, very nicely. And this model is the SSD, and this has an interesting black case, and again it features the same design as their other models with that tonneau style of case, except now the movement has been chosen carefully, and it's one of Seiko's in-house three-hand quartz movements, which again is going to keep extremely good accuracy. But the reason for the choice of this movement is again shown by the case profile, being considerably under 10 millimeters thick and the same 41.5 millimeter diameter, does make this watch very, very wearable, and actually even more wearable, while it sort of slips onto the wrist like so and doesn't really present any obstruction, which is something I find very appealing on a watch when they can produce a very slim timepiece. And again, the dial detailing is superb, with these hands being loomed, along with the numerals being loomed as well, giving the watch a great deal of legibility in the dark. And little details such as the fact they've put a black point on the minute hand, just so that it protrudes slightly into that racing style of minute marking, just to give you that little bit more legibility, which wouldn't have been the case had they kept a white hand. And again, as with the dial of the CHR, the chronograph, you see that the white on, for example, the dial is a slightly off gold white, which really does add to the depth of the watch and makes it appear far, far more attractive than it would be if it had a simple white dial. And again, the styling of this, just as the styling of the chronograph model, is very, very 70s. This really is screaming 1960s in terms of its design, and does represent a sort of a racing dial in a car or a gauge, which again is something that I do appreciate. And once more, it has the nicely engraved case back, denoting the fact that this watch is water resistant to 5 atmospheres, so 50 meters. It's not a watch to swim with, but nonetheless, you could there's not going to be any danger of getting this watch wet. And again, the care taken has been shown again with the crown, which is non-PVD, which is something I appreciate, because having owned quite a few PVD watches in the past, I found the crowns are very, very susceptible to losing their coating and becoming rather unsightly after not very much time. So it's rather nice to have this crown in simple bead-blasted steel, which does make it more resistant. And of course, that quartz movement is an interesting choice, and I think many people will have a few arguments about putting a quartz movement in a £150 watch. But in my eyes, it's suitable because of the thickness of the case being allowed to be so slim, especially with those multiple levels to the dial, and as well with the various matte and shiny sections on the dial, which do add to the depth of it and make it all the more attractive. And again, the one other reason why this movement, I think, fits the watch very well is the fact that any other movement with small seconds around this price point would have them offset to either the sort of 4:30 position or at the 9 o'clock position, which simply wouldn't work with this design and would lead to an unbalanced style of watch, which I think wouldn't work terribly well. And so as a result, I do feel this watch does work much better in that respect. And again, the lettering on the dial is raised somewhat, which again adds to the care taken and does make this watch, as well as the chronograph model, appear somewhat hand painted, which is a feature which I find very attractive. And then again, the straps offered on this watch are indeed the same leather strap as seen on that one, as well as this Cordura strap, which is the best Cordura strap I think I've ever come across. And obviously excluding the strap, for example, the one on the Omega Speedmaster Dark Side of the Moon, which is again a superb strap, but it's an £8,000 watch, so really one would expect it. But this short of that Speedmaster strap is the only Cordura strap I've ever come across which tapers, and that's again a feature which makes this all the more comfortable and does, as you can see, make the strap fade into the watch silhouette on the wrist, and again is leather backed as well as being leather fronted around the holes to give it more resistance to fraying with that flat end as well, which again does add to the comfort of the watch. And once buckled onto the wrist using this very interesting style of buckle, which again is signed and does match the watches very nicely, one gets a watch which does fit extremely nicely on the wrist and does present itself as a very attractive option for someone looking for a racing sports watch, but who doesn't want to spend the few £100 more than this watch on the watches from Autodromo, which arguably aren't that much high quality in their high-end models, and really are exactly the same quality, if not lesser in terms of dial detailing on their lower-end models. So really, I feel you're getting an incredibly large amount for the money. And again, with this watch, it really does have a very, very slim profile and fits very, very nicely onto the wrist, which again is an attractive feature considering the fact that this is a watch which is designed to be a semi-sports watch. It's designed to have that sporting pedigree and heritage in terms of its styling, but is also designed to be wearable on a daily basis. And the same is true with the chronograph model, which again sits on the wrist very, very comfortably, as you can see, and buckles on very nicely, like so. And as a result, does fit very well in terms of being accessible without having pushers and a crown that dig into the wrist when one moves, which is often a problem, where here one still has easy access to the pushers and so on to allow one to adjust the timing of the watch and use it during daily wear, which is something that I do appreciate, and I certainly understand the fact that the wearability of a watch and the comfort is really paramount, because after all, what good is a beautiful chair if it's not comfortable? So in conclusion, what I'd like to say is that I do find this brand very refreshing because they offer something which is, in terms of aesthetics, very, very attractive, but that does fulfill its criteria as far as being, in this case, a chronograph that appeals to the racing functions with that split-second indicator, and also with that very interesting dial layout, which is very legible as well as being very retro-inspired, but whilst not having any snobbery with regards to the movement, and they really have chosen a movement that fulfills all the criteria required. And of course, for £2,000 or £3,000 more, you could get a movement which would be this slim and would function very, very well. But in many ways, this is the best one can get without spending a fortune on the watch and changing the aesthetics of the watch and the functionality due to that thickness being changed and also the size of the watch altogether being changed. So please do leave your comments down below as to what you think of a quartz movement in a watch. And also do please leave your comments down below as to what you think of these watches in particular. So thank you very much for watching, and please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to join more content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.